What part does reading play in childhood? We memorize and gaze over countless tales and books of wonder and savor the same tradition of passing it on to our kids. Children are meant to fall in love with tantalizing journeys, but what would happen if those stories were tainted? Would we be the same people or have learned the same lessons? This is what happens without the supervision of guardians and guarded encouragement of new experiences. Every year, children are sent through the Scholastic Book Fair in America's hopes of improving literacy, but the goal is to keep these literary adventures beneficial, if not only to protect young generations in the now, but also better the adults of the near future. Parents should monitor children's literature as they do television. As parents limit what their children visually consume, this content is just as frequent in literature and more vividly expressed. In an Aeon magazine, an essay detailing the history of dangerous literature opens with, at universities around the world, students are claiming that reading books can unsettle them to the point of becoming depressed, traumatized, or even suicidal. The influence of writing is insurmountable and beautiful when used for betterment, yet this power, like others, shouldn't go unchecked. Exposure is inevitable, but the methods of which one is exposed and those experiences need to be addressed in a consumable manner if at all possible. In order to protect mental health, it's important for students to have trigger warnings to aid in battling unwanted anxieties. Implementing a structure of age ratings and oversight can help ease audiences past mental issues, as sometimes relatability with the character can be overwhelming. An article by Justin Colson for the Institute for Family Studies reports ongoing or even periodic and accidental exposure to sexual and violent content is empirically proven to have a desensitized impact on both children and adults. The content we inhale teaches and normalizes behaviors that we are then to enact. Without barriers, advice, or guidance through content, the education standpoint of reading grows mixed with the desensitization of such repetitive themes. Repetition of stories and morality can go unchecked in the literature patterns children are predisposed to picking and how schools choose books to teach the same general lessons. If not found in the library, the most accessible place for children to acquire literature is through apps, which are often geared towards sexual content. If you walk into most local middle or high schools, plenty of students, reader or not, will likely have Choices, Wattpad, or Episode downloaded, if not all of these apps. The nonprofit organization Common Sense Media reviews Episode as being for ages 15 and up, while noting most, if not all, stories either contain references to or are entirely based on dating, romance, and or sexual behavior, and plenty of stereotypes. Though reviewed as being for teenagers, easily accessible and popular reading games are filled with sexual content and negative reflections of diversity. When ingesting this content, young minds are influenced by unrealistic expectations or materialistic aspirations, which can be a detriment when transferred to reality without a predisposed filter of knowledge. The same organization reviewed Wattpad in saying teens and adults can publicly share their fiction writing in a blog-like format. The relatively unmoderated environment means younger teens should proceed with lots of caution. A platform for young writers to express their ideas is a great tool, but leaves much to be desired for reflection and supervision. Even if meant for good, children being met with sensitive subjects in unprepared settings can lead to more confusion than understanding. There is also no basis to protect from the influence of violent or misrepresented information. Keeping in mind the importance of literature, access shouldn't be limited forever, but appropriate to the maturity level of its reader. In finding a ground for literary propriety, banning books has reigned as the most sought after method, but it has provided more negative effects than positive. When reflecting on a Porn in Schools report and banned books, an NBC article reports that 41% explicitly express LGBTQ themes and 40% include protagonists or secondary characters of color. Though children should be shielded from inappropriate content, the characteristics of such are debatable. In movie ratings, immature audiences are prevented from concrete subjects like drug use and language before being able to handle it. The opinion-based and targeted aspect of banning books could deter diverse children from reaching their literary potential, because as people, we crave to see representation. Using such a subjective system that can permanently disenfranchise literature from certain platforms is inherently faulty. Restricting the opportunity to grow an open mind and transparently understand the world will only hinder children once they enter the adult world, which is why literary restrictions should reflect waiting rather than halting altogether. An article written by Lucy Atkinson for the Northern Star News notes the spread and discussion of information is how humanity learns. The uncomfort which is fueling these bans is not something our society can afford. Diverse voices have been heavily encouraged throughout society to educate audience on the realities of a growing divergent culture. Banning books not only silences such valuable voices, but can help to institutionalize intolerant attitudes towards differences. With all the information we've consumed, we must ask ourselves why the best solution to child literacy exposure is monitoring and potentially adding age ratings. Books are lucid descriptions of fictional and real events, which provide a realism to all content, even that of which is inappropriate to its audience. The most easily accessible and mass consumed apps for reading are largely stereotypical or sexual in distribution. And lastly, the exposure of such themes shouldn't be permanently restricted, as to avoid subjective and prejudicial approaches to banning books. The moral of the story is that literature has power, but like most things, it is another responsibility that parents take on to aid their children. To that end, in order to preserve the childhoods of each generation, we must bear the responsibility of mentoring them through such new and astounding adventures.